Joining us now, Boot Crew Media, Chris Rosvoglou. Chris, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm doing well.
Good to have you back on the program. I want to start with Derek Carr because next week we are, unless somebody comes in with a trade offer, which sort of seems unlikely because Carr can veto it, that Derek Carr is going to be a free agent next week, 3 days after the Super Bowl. So there's a lot of buzz around what might happen with him, and certainly there's a lot of teams looking for a quarterback. What chances do you give that the Saints are interested here and that there's mutual interest by Carr?
Yeah, I think from the Saints' perspective, there's definitely interest there. He would give them stability. He'd give them leadership. He'd give them a quarterback that I think in terms of schematic fit would actually go well with Pete Carmichael. On the other side, it's already been reported that New Orleans is a place that he wouldn't say no to, which is great. My question would be, though, when does he fall in terms of all the dominoes? If a guy like Aaron Rodgers is the first domino to go, and let's say he doesn't go to a team like the Jets and he goes to the Raiders, then all of a sudden are the Jets considered maybe a more attractive option for Derek Carr? So I think that's something to consider, but I definitely think right now when we look at realistic options and best options for the Saints in 2023, I think Derek Carr would have to be at the top of the list right now, and I do think there is a legitimate chance that these two parties kind of come together and make something happen, but they'd have to be smart with the contract. And, it also comes down to, Derek Carr, does he think this is the best situation for him? And I think with the lack of quarterback talent in the NFC South, it might be.
The contract is the real kicker here. And when you look at contracts in the NFL, quarterback contracts, there's the very, very top of the food chain. There's Aaron Rodgers at $50 million a year. There's Pat Mahomes at $45 million a year. There's Russell Wilson somewhere in between those two, and Josh Allen. Then you have the guys, the outstanding quarterbacks that are still on rookie deals like Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. Carr sort of fits into that middle class, and if you look at his stats and his salary, it lines up with two guys that I think frustrate their fan bases, but even though they put up good numbers. One of them's Dak Prescott, and one of them's Kirk Cousins. Over the last 3 years, their yardage numbers are similar, their touchdowns and interceptions are similar, and their salaries are similar. But there's this thought process that Prescott and Cousins are good. Carr is good, but he's not Aaron Rodgers. He's not Pat Mahomes. He's not Josh Allen. But he's better than, at least half of the quarterbacks in the league. So do you want to pay Derek Carr $40 million a year, which is what he was making? And can the Saints even afford that if they want to?
Well, in terms of afford, I think the Saints have that opportunity and the flexibility this offseason. If they want to kind of push the can yet again down the road with, the cap increasing year by year, they can. They'll find a way. But I do think if Derek Carr does become a free agent, I think that's the likelihood right now. I kind of think in terms of what the base salary be, what he'd make total for the year, I think it'd probably be a little bit less than what he would be set to make under his current contract. But to your point, you're still going to pay a premium, right? If I say it's going to be less, it's not going to be much less. It'll probably still be $35 million, maybe even more than that. But I think for New Orleans, it comes down to whether or not they really think they can compete this year. And if the answer is yes, and you can work out a deal where it's a 2-3 year deal, I think way you can defend it. Because the way I look at Derek Carr is kind of to your point. There's going to be games where he's going to play fantastic, and we're probably going to talk ourselves into they can get to certain goals with Derek Carr. And there'll be other games where you get a little frustrated and you say, well, what's kind of the ceiling with a guy like this? But I think for the Saints right now, this division is just so up for grabs. There's no proven quarterback. I mean, the most proven quarterback would be Jameis Winston, and I kind of think he will part ways with the Saints in, let's say, the coming weeks, maybe coming months. So I think Derek Carr immediately on the Saints team puts them at the top, and for them, if that's worth it, if that's worth the price of $40 million, they can definitely make it happen.
Put your Mickey Loomis hat on here for a second. If your choices are Derek Carr on, let's say, a 4-year deal at it's somewhere close to $40 million a year, or Andy Dalton on a 1-year, say, $12 million a year deal, and you start this all up over again next year, what do you pick?
I think a lot of it comes down to I'd say the desperate nature of this coaching staff. And because of that, if I am, Mickey Loomis and Dennis Allen, when you get together here, I think you say, okay, if we have to win this year because everyone's job's on the line, then we probably have to go for Derek Carr. Now, if I'm Mickey Loomis and I'm not completely sold on this coaching staff, then I probably lean the other way. And I probably say, okay, Andy Dalton, maybe we look at a quarterback in this class. There were a couple, whether it's at the Senior Bowl that they may have liked or even thinking about moving up, there'll be options there. And that'll probably be the smarter play. But I do think there is that kind of do-or-die time where it's not just about the coaching staff. There's a lot of veterans right now, Demario Davis, Cam Jordan, Alvin Kamara, Ryan Ramczyk, where you start to think it's not now when in terms of maximizing that window and winning a championship for those guys. So I do think it's a tough position, but I think if they're all on, hey, our jobs are on the line, we got to make something happen, you kind of have to go with Derek Carr because you've seen what the alternative is with Andy Dalton.
You bring up a fascinating scenario, Chris, because this is my opinion. I'll see what you think. Dennis Allen's job is on the line next year. I don't think there's much question about that. But Mickey Loomis's isn't. At least I don't think it is. If the Saints were to go 5-12 next year, Allen's getting fired. But I don't know that Loomis is. So when you got a GM whose job is not on the line, but the coach's job is, who wins?
You know, I would imagine in this scenario with the way that, Mickey Loomis has been in New Orleans for such a long time and he's accomplished a lot, I'd have to imagine Mickey would win. But I think Mickey right now with the way it's going on, obviously him and DA have a good relationship. They feel like this season was a little bit of some bad breaks, some injuries, and then some miscues obviously here and there, and those can't be understated. But I think for him, they want to make it work with this staff badly. I don't think they really want to be in that position where you're looking for a new staff again. And if they do have to get rid of DA, trust me, there'd be so many changes they'd have to make because you're basically clearing almost the entire house. So, if it comes down to that type of power struggle, I have to imagine that Mickey wins. But I do think that they kind of both have their hands in this and they're trying to figure it out together. And for that reason, I do think that's why they're probably going to be in the market for a guy like Derek Carr and say, okay, win the South. Maybe you can steal a playoff game. Who knows? But you got to get in the big dance, obviously, to have a shot at it, and I think that's the way they're looking at it right now.
Chris Rosvoglou is our guest from Boot Crew Media covering the Saints. What did you take out of Senior Bowl week? The Saints are notoriously tight-lipped, although Jeff Ireland did talk to the media last week, which is unusual. But what did you take from Senior Bowl week out of Saints camp?
Yeah, for the Senior Bowl, for starters, what I found fascinating and not really surprising at all is the hype that we've kind of seen around Tyjae Spears. And I think the Saints have an interesting decision to make on not just a running back like him, but running backs of his nature, where do they want to go with the complementary back to an Alvin Kamara and kind of get maybe a more physical back who can really also have that home run speed, or do they kind of like the explosive nature of a guy like Tyjae Spears and kind of think not just for 2023, but 2024, 2025, and maybe find a long-term Alvin Kamara replacement? And if so, you won't have to look very far because the Tulane product really shined at the Senior Bowl, and he'll keep getting better. But, I'm also looking at some quarterbacks. I mean, Jake Haener from Fresno State is a player who people raved about leadership, raved about his accuracy. And, if the Saints decide to go the Andy Dalton with drafting a quarterback route, maybe that's someone they look at, and that'll be interesting to see. But what I find really kind of interesting on the whole Senior Bowl front for the Saints is two guys who had a really, really important role in all this, Ron Curry and then also Dequan Doyle. These are guys who are just, between those two, Doyle and Curry, they played a big role at the Senior Bowl in evaluating talent, and they're also linked to the Broncos right now. So if the Saints were to lose both of them, or even one of them, I wonder how that kind of changes their scouting approach.
Who do you like in the Super Bowl?
A couple of days ago, I was thinking, I love the way Mahomes has been playing, and I think the Chiefs just had it. But I keep going back to this Eagles team, and they're just so well-rounded. Their pass rush is just absolutely sensational. What they've done is historic stuff this year. Offensively, they just have the weapons to overwhelm you. They have the ground game. I think I'm leaning Eagles. I've been flipping back and forth, but I just go down to them having the better overall roster. I really love what their defense has been able to do. And Jalen Hurts in that run game, when they get it going, it's tough to stop. And I think that's something that Cincinnati failed to do against Kansas City in the AFC Championship game, but I feel like Philly will have a chance to run on the Chiefs.
Chris, as always, we appreciate the time. We'll talk to you when we're getting ready for the Combine. Thanks so much.